Alright, now we're back for the next podcast. Our focus on this one is going to be adding the configuration of the router for it to process the phone calls. In a large business environment, you would have a server processing all these phone calls, a call manager server kind of thing. In a smaller business, I can actually have my router processing handle the phone calls. That can be done for usually up to around 36 phones. That's usually kind of the limit. So these routers actually can handle the phone call processing. So I need to tell the router, hey, turn that on and handle these phone calls. So we're going to add that configuration to the router now. That's what we're going to do. So in the lab, I tell you to grab 2 phones and the power cords for them. Our current switches do not do power over Ethernet, so we're using the power bricks. This switches that do power over Ethernet would be better, but for our lab, we're just going to use the power bricks for the phones. Grab those 2 phones. In the lab, I tell you to turn the phone around, and on the back of the phone is written the MAC address. Carefully copy that down. Carefully copy down that MAC address. You will need that because we are going to plug that MAC address into that phone and say this MAC address is blah phone number. This is how you would do it in business. You would say this particular phone belongs to Doug Brown. It's this phone number. So we're going to configure that in. All right. So on my router, I'm back on my router. I'm going to get to enable mode, and I'm going to config T. The first thing I need to do is tell the router kind of the general stuff we need to know about the phone processing. So I'm going to start off by saying telephony service. That's kind of telling it, hey, we want to do this now, and we're going to tell it max e-phones for this network is going to be 12. It needs to know, about how many phones we're plugging in. Well, we're doing 2, but we're telling it, hey, there's going to be about 12 people in this network. And the other part of this, we need max DN, directory numbers. This is physical phones. This would be people. So like 12 phones, 12 people in this company, if you will. So we tell it that. We then tell it, hey, the IP address, the IP source address, where the phones are going to get their config and the phone calls are going to be processed is what IP address? Well, it's going to be the router on the voice VLAN. So we're going to say, hey, the router voice VLAN port, the phones are going to be talking to, this will be the one that does the configuration and processing of the phone calls. We then need to tell it Dialplan Pattern. The first pattern that we have is going to be the phone number for all these phones. So we're pretending we're dealing with the 717-780-1... ... These are wildcards. So 717-780-1001, 1002, 1003. This allows any digits to show up in here. So that's kind of like the phone number for this facility. And we're telling it, hey, the extensions in here are 4 digits long. So we have extensions 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. So we're saying this is kind of the phone number for the whole facility. And then we want to allow, if somebody is going to make a phone call, transfer system full consult. If somebody makes a phone call and we need to transfer it to somebody else, this is allowing that to be done. You call in and say, how do I transfer your call? This is allowing that to be done. We also need to create a file that's going to get handed to the phone. This is an XML file that's going to get handed to the phone with some configuration. We need to create that, CNF files. We don't have to do this part, but this part's kind of fun. I want to put a message on all my phones, and a company would probably be the company name, ABC Consulting or whatever. I would put that on the phone. That way it shows, hey, this is the company phone. We're going to have a little bit more fun than that. We're going to say Starship Enterprise. On my phones now will be displayed my company name, in this case Starship Enterprise, for my phones. That is the basic config, and if I do a show run right now, you'll see there was my DHCP config, there's my subinterface config, keep going. Down here is my NAT config, here is my telephony config, there it is. Max phones, max DN, source address, system message, CNF files, there's my pattern, transfer system full consult. Yay! There's my basic telephony config. We now need to add, and we're going to add these pieces separately. I'm going to add people directories. I don't have it listed here, but I'm going to add people to my system. and then I'm going to add phones. We do it in two pieces because as people move around, we might need to connect them to a different phone. Example, Doug Brown gets promoted, he's in a new office, he has a new phone number, so we need to move Doug Brown to a different phone. So I can leave the phones alone and just move Doug Brown. Another example, what if Doug Brown's phone just all of a sudden no longer works and we need to replace it? Well, we don't need to replace Doug Brown in the config, we just need to replace the phone. So plugging in the pieces separately seems like more work, but it allows us to kind of move puzzle pieces around and connect them up as necessary. So I'm going to plug people in like Doug Brown, and then I'm going to plug phones in like MAC addresses, and then I will tie those two together. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in my ePhone DN is what it's called. ePhone DN, first one. This is the directory number, if you will. The first one I'm dealing with, the number, oops. I get back here. There we go. I'll try it again. Here we go. ePhone DN, I got ahead of myself. First directory number. The actual phone number for this guy is going to be 1001. And we can make it whatever we want. We're just plugging the first one in. We're going to indicate the name of the user on this phone. In this case, here's Kirk, of course. We've got to have the captain here somewhere. So that's my first directory entry. That's the first person that would be in my company. I might as well do the other phone while I'm here, the other directory while I'm here. ePhone DN2. Give it a second, it'll pop up saying that that's available. I will now do number 1002, and I'm now going to plug a name in of, let's do Montgomery Scott. Got to have Scotty in here somewhere. So now I have my two directory entries. If I take a look at my running config, I'm going to zip down here to the bottom. Right below the telephony config, I will see my two people in here. So I have two people in here. I would continue that for any other employees in the business. The next thing I need to do is actually plug in the physical phone itself. This is where I told you to write the MAC addresses down off your phones. And again, carefully copy them. A typo can create a bit of a havoc in your system, having to delete and put new in. It can be messy, so carefully copy that MAC address down. All right, and its MAC addresses, it's 0 through 9 and A through F. There's no other characters in there. All right, so the first one I'm going to do ePhone 1. This is the first physical phone I'm dealing with. I will plug in the MAC address, and here's where I need to carefully copy it. 0012 dot. It wants 4 digits and a dot. 0045 is what I got, and 8599. That's my first MAC address, and I'm going to double check it before I hit the enter key. So there's the first MAC address. I'm going to indicate what type of phone this is. This is a 7940. Look at the model number on the front of the phone. All right, the next piece, this can get confusing, but here's what I need. I need the button command, and I'm going to do that. Well, let me explain what you're doing real quick. The button command is going to tie this physical phone to this person up here. And the syntax works this way. I'm going to say button, and I have number colon number. The first number is the actual physical button on my phone. If you look at your 7940s, on the right there's two little gray buttons. That would be button 1 and 2. I can put this phone number on either one of those buttons that I want. I can change that. And some people like to have a certain number on a certain kind of like speed dial button, if you will. So we're saying this phone number is tied to the first physical button on the phone. And the second number here is the key one. This says what DN number is going to be associated with this phone. Well, in this case, it's going to be DN1. Kirk is going to be tied to this physical phone. I will execute that. I'm going to exit, and I'm going to repeat this for my second phone. So I will use the ePhone 2. I will use the MAC address command again. I will delete that and plug in my MAC address, 000D in this case for me, BC, and I can use this all lowercase, 34.FD5B, and I'm double checking, 000D BC34FD5B. There's the next MAC address. This is another 7940, and I'm going to do the button command again. Physical button on the phone, colon DN2. This one's going to get tied to Montgomery Scott because Montgomery Scott was DN2. So there I have my two phones plugged in, and again, if I look at my config, I'm going to zip down here. Here's my telephony config, and below that I have my DNs and I have my ePhones, and I see that ePhone 1 is tied to DN1, ePhone 2 is tied to DN2, and again, I can reissue these commands and move them around if I need to. That's what that allows me to do. What I can do now is I can reach over and actually physically plug my phones in. And I'm going to do that. I'm reaching over, I'm going to plug my phones in. I'm going to make sure that they are in VLAN 10 ports, if you will. Then I will power them on. I'm probably going to pause this podcast while they power on. That way we're not watching them boot up, but I am going to watch them boot up to make sure they're getting IPs and all that. So let me pause. I'm going to let them boot, and then I will come back. All right, and we're back. I gave the phones a few minutes to register and get their IP and all that jazz. If you look in the lab, at this point I had you plug your phones into VLAN 10, watch the boot process. As the phones are booting, they're recognizing what VLAN they're in. They're talking to the router, getting their IP address from the DHCP server. I also told you, and when they're done booting, they should come up with a phone number, 1001, 1002 thing, which you configured in. I see that on my phones. The next thing I tell you to do is take your PC and plug it into one of the phones. I think I plugged it into this one on mine. And when you're done, I'm going to pull up a command prompt. Here's my command prompt, and I'm going to do an IP config on this guy, and I should be picking up an IP address from my DHCP server, and I am. There's the 172.1650.10. So my phone is picking up a 10, and my PC is picking up a 50. So even though my PC is plugged into my phone into the same switch port, my phone is getting an IP address from the voice VLAN and voice scope, and my PC is getting an IP from the data VLAN, the data scope. That's exactly what we want. So I'm going to have you verify that. After you do that, I'm going to have you make some phone calls, make sure your phone calls work. And if I go over to my phone real quick, I can do a dial 1001. Yay, there you go. You should hear the phone ringing. Yay. So my phone calls are working. I even have you, do a couple test calls back and forth. I then going to have you do a show ePhone. This should show your two phones that are registered and the details about them. ePhone 1, the MAC address, etc., etc. ePhone 2, MAC address, and you even see the DNs and all that jazz here. I'm going to have you do that, and then I'm also going to have you set up a phone call. So let me do a phone call here again. I'll do a dial. I will pick it up, make the phone call active. Then I'm going to reissue the show ePhone, and what I should see now is these phones are active and talking back and forth, passing data back and forth. It even gives you some details of who's talking. And in here, it also starts showing me your codec. There it is. Look at that. Okay, that's one thing I'm going to have you look for in the lab. So at that point, I have you play with the phones a little bit, do a little bit kind of looking around with the phones, see them working, see them function. What you're going to want to do at this point then is save your router config to a text file, move your console back to the switch, save your switch config as a text file. These two are going to be submitted for proof of your Cisco voice over IP network config part of the lab. So that kind of finishes up the router, hard phone, desktop phone part of our lab.